Welcome to the Beyond Addiction series. My name is Adrian Webster, and in this very first segment in this series, I'd like to share with you my personal story. I've entitled this particular segment, Victory Assured, Personal Testimony, and we're going to do it in two parts. Part one, I will give you the story, as it were, and part two, I'll give you some of the keys that helped me to get out of the problem of addiction. I grew up in a fairly well-to-do home. I didn't have any major problems in life. I had happily married parents, still have happily married parents. We were not rich, but we were also not poor. We lived in a middle-class suburb, so to speak. We had all the advantages that children should have, not only a happy and stable home. We had a spiritual home. My parents were Christians, and they brought us up in that Christian environment. We attended church every weekend. They could afford to send myself and my sister to Christian education schools, and so we had every advantage that could possibly be offered to a child as they are growing up. You would think that in this environment that I would have flourished. You would think that in this environment I would have been safeguarded against the problem of addiction. You would think that there would be nothing that would push me over the edge into the area of substance abuse and addiction. But this was not the case. I always like to start with this part of my story because I want to highlight to parents especially that sometimes children make their own decisions. We can do everything in our power to give our children the best opportunity at success. But there are times, there comes a point in a child's life where they have to begin to make decisions of their own accord and based on their own decisions. And so this was a real challenge for me. As I grew up, I quickly got into the world of drug abuse and drug addiction. But despite the fact that I had every advantage, I shouldn't have gone in that direction, yet I did. What was it? What is it that would drive a child to that kind of experience when there's no logical reason for them to go into that world of drug abuse? You know, sometimes we think the only people who get into drug abuse are people who come from bad socioeconomic environments or from bad neighborhoods or from bad parents. And yes, certainly every single one of those aspects will for sure predispose a person to a situation where they would want maybe to form a world of escape, a place where they can get away from their problems, from their home challenges, from their societal problems. They may want to give in to peer pressure in the neighborhood with all the other kids that are going along with it. But that is not the background I came from. I always highlight that because we've got to break the stereotype that's in some people's minds about what it is or what type of person it is that gets involved with drug addiction. So as I was growing up, as I say, every possible advantage, good home, good neighborhood, good schools, good church, good parents, every possible advantage. There was, however, one area of my life that I had left the door wide open to the enemy of souls, and that was the area of music. As I was growing up as a young person, I was very, very, very keen on music, just as today our young people are keen on music. In fact, it's even worse today now with the advent of portable music players like iPods and the like, MP3 players. We can take our music just about everywhere we go. It's on our cell phones, it's on our MP3 players, it's on whatever it is that we carry our music along. We carry it on our laptops. Music has become an all-pervasive influence in the world today, and I was part of that generation as I was growing up as a young person that really enjoyed having music with me everywhere I went, from the youngest of age. And I had gotten involved with the heavy metal music type genre. And so, as it would be, I would go to school with it, I would come home with it, I would wake up to it, I would go to sleep with it, I'd leave the radio station, tune into the heavy metal grunge music station so that if I woke up in the middle of the night, the music would be on, and I would surround myself with these influences, as it were. I would make sure that every waking moment of my life, I was surrounded by this music. And you know, that music was a powerful, powerful influence in my life. I cannot emphasize to you how powerful music really can be. You know, there's this idea in the world today that music is neutral. There's this idea that you don't need to worry about what music you listen to. You don't need to worry about what music your child is listening to or your friends are listening to, because music is neutral after all. So it's not really going to matter. This is not the case at all. The one area of my life that I, as it were, gave the devil a foothold in my life was through the type of music that I listened to. And I'm not just talking about the lyrics of that music. I'm not just talking about the anti-authority, the rebellion, the angry type of lyrics that go into this rock music and this grunge music and the heavy metal music. I'm talking about the very music itself. As I was growing up as a young person, despite all those advantages that I shared with you a few seconds ago, I became a very angry teenager. For no reason, by the way, a very, very rebellious teenager. I hated all authority figures. Where was I getting that message from? Where was I receiving that? It certainly wasn't because my parents had treated me wrong. It certainly wasn't because my teachers were treating me wrong, or because, you know, the societal authority figures were treating me wrong. What was it? I can only pin it down to the type of music that I was listening to. You know, the heavy metal rock music musicians will openly and avowedly tell you that, in fact, their music is about anger, it is about rebellion, it is about this high energy, high velocity, frustration, as it were. The music itself creates that atmosphere, not just the lyrics. And so as I was growing up listening to AC/DC and Metallica and Guns N' Roses and all these popular, well-known, well-established heavy metal and grunge music type bands, I began to absorb their way of seeing the world. I began to absorb the message from those lyrics. I began to absorb the atmosphere that was created by the music. And so without any logical reason, I became a very frustrated, very angry, very rebellious. I didn't want anybody to get in my way. I wanted to do what I wanted, when I wanted, with whom I wanted, and nobody and nothing must stand in the way. I wanted to be a law unto myself, and I used to scream and shout at my parents at times when we were having these stand-up arguments. You know, I wanted to go and do something they didn't want me to be doing. I wanted to go to a place they didn't want me to go to. I wanted to hang out with friends they didn't want me to, and we would get into these stand-up arguments, borderline physically violent fights. And I would scream and shout at them and tell them that it's my life and it's my body and it's my mind, and you know, they must just butt out because it's got nothing to do with them. Yes, they gave me their gift of life as parents, but now that it was mine, I should be able to do what I wanted, when I wanted, with whom I wanted, however I pleased. And that, you know, as it were, the whole, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That sort of mentality, that sort of thinking behind the way I was growing up, the attitudes that I was forming. And so I resented my parents, I resented my teachers, I resented the pastors, and I resented the police. I resented all of these people because they were authority figures that would stop me from doing what I wanted, when I wanted, with whomever I wanted, however I wanted. They had all these rules and these regulations, and I wanted nothing. My definition of freedom was being able to come and go and do as you please. Didn't matter about anybody else as long as you were just pleasing yourself. That's what I thought true freedom would be. Later on in life, I discovered that that doesn't actually bring true freedom, that in reality, that's the road to slavery. The book of Proverbs says something interesting. The book of Proverbs says that there is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. That's a very profound philosophy, a very profound observation about life that I myself have found to be true. That there is a way that seems right to a young person. I mean, it seems like if you can just please yourself, if you can just do as you want, if there's no one around to tell you no to this or no to that or yes to this or you must do this or you mustn't do that, that will be true freedom. That then you have arrived. And I discovered that when you live like that, the reality is you end up as a slave. You end up addicted. You end up in a place where you wish that life would end. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So as I grew up resenting authority figures, believing that they would spoil my fun, that their sole mission in life was to make sure I couldn't enjoy life, I had as little to do with these authority figures as possible, and I began to go, as it were, underground. I began to go, into a very secretive life, trying to do a lot of things without anybody knowing, without anybody seeing. And it wasn't long before I ended up very suicidal. I ended up suicidal because I looked at life and I couldn't figure out what the purpose was. I couldn't be free like I wanted to be free because of all these authority figures in my life. And at the other hand, I didn't really know, what's the point? You get up in the morning, you go about the same routine every day, whether it's school or whether it's work or whatever it is. You go through a whole lot of nonsense in life. You go through a whole lot of pain and suffering in life. And then what? And then you die. And it's all over. And as a young person, I began thinking about this. And I was wondering to myself, why is it that we tolerate this? Why is it that that's what we do? Why must we do the same thing every day for a lifetime, at the end of which we simply die, and that's the end of the road? And I began to think to myself, I might not have had a choice about coming into this world. I might not have had a choice about being born and beginning life, but I certainly have a choice about ending life. And I figured surely what I need to do here is to short-circuit the process. I need to cut life short. Why live, suffer, and die? Why cut that suffering part short? And so as a young person, and I'm talking here about by the time I was in grade 6, grade 7, I was already beginning to think about suicide all the time. I would just for the fun of it take razor blades and mutilate myself, cutting myself up, making myself bleed, making myself feel pain. And what for? I don't know why. I don't know where I got those ideas, or actually, wait a second, I think I do. Because when I began to get out of the heavy metal music scene and I began to do a little bit of research and study and looked at how my heroes in the rock music industry were acting and behaving, whether it was on stage or in their personal life, I discovered they too were suicidal. They too didn't want to be alive. They too were cutting themselves and mutilating themselves, and somehow the spirit of their music was beginning to take hold of me. It was beginning to influence the way I thought and the way I acted and the way I lived. And so, at the end of the day, here I was, grade 6, grade 7, beginning to experience suicidal tendencies, wondering what the meaning and the purpose of life is, and then I went off to high school. Now, you will know that high school is a bit of a different place to primary school. And so here in secondary or high school, I got in with a certain crowd of friends. And it was these friends who introduced me to what I thought I had discovered now as the meaning and the purpose of life. I was introduced to the world of substance abuse, and it began with the socially acceptable drugs. It began with the substances that no one even thinks are drugs. You know, the caffeinated beverages and the energy drinks, not to mention the tobacco and the alcohol. And of course, these things were legal, although, well, kind of illegal, seeing as we were still so young. But amongst adults, they were socially acceptable things to do. It wasn't like doing hard drugs, and I hadn't yet gotten to that point of my experience. But all of a sudden, discovering the, quote, sarcastically, the wonders of alcohol, I all of a sudden had a distraction in my life. I all of a sudden had a reason to get up in the morning. I knew why I was here now. If for no other reason, our purpose in life was to seek pleasure. Now, I didn't know this, but there is a fancy technical philosophical name for that outlook on life, and it is hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure, is the great goal of life, and everything is subordinate to that great goal, pleasure. You know, if it feels good, if it makes you enjoy life, then that's what you should do. The ethic in life is not so much about what's right and wrong as about what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So if it feels good, do it. It doesn't matter about the law. It doesn't matter about, legal or illegal. It doesn't matter about how it's going to affect other people. It's all about me and my sense of pleasure, and if it feels good, then I need to do it. And so with that sort of framework in my thinking, I now knew why I was here. I was here for the weekends. I went to school to recover for the weekends. I went to school for 5 days so that the last 2 days of the weekend I could be refreshed and I could be tuned in to the weekend's parties and the weekend's fun activities. And so for the first while, a friend of myself, we would go off and we would sneak in a bottle of alcohol. We would find a way to get it from the bottle store. We would go walk up the mountain or go somewhere where we weren't going to get found or caught, and we would just get completely plastered. We would just get to the point where we couldn't walk, where we would be vomiting, where we would be just completely disoriented. We could do nothing. We could hardly communicate, and that was what we called fun, getting to the point where the brain basically just shut down and the body shut down, and we would just lie there in a pool of our own vomit, and then we would get up afterwards and be like, "Wow, wasn't that cool, man? Let's come back and do that next weekend." But as you can imagine, that didn't last too long. You can only do that a few times before you realize it too is empty. One problem: while I had been distracted from my suicidal tendencies, now that I was using alcohol a lot and using alcohol very heavily, alcohol is actually a central nervous system depressant. It wasn't solving my problems. Now remember, my problems were really non-existent, I must admit. I had all those positive advantages, but in my own mind, I'd become dissatisfied and discontented with life. And all the small little things, I was picking up baggage throughout life. Somebody looked at me wrong, somebody tried to reprimand me, and I would accumulate this baggage. I didn't know the experience of forgiveness. And if you've ever battled with the spirit of unforgiveness, you will know what I'm talking about. It is nothing to burden the soul and to drain out the life forces like a spirit of unforgiveness. And so here I was as a young person, no real worries to worry about, but all these perceived wrongs that were being done to me, all these people who were acting in love in reality, but whom I perceived to be trying to get in my way, shut me down, stop me from having fun. And I accumulated all this resentment and this anger and this bitterness and this hatred and this rage inside of me. And yes, suicidal tendencies, and then the distraction with the alcohol, a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to go forward with life. And then all of a sudden reaching a point where I came full circle and I realized this thing wasn't solving my problems. The novelty of it wore off, and that's all that it was at the end analysis. All that it was is it was a novelty, it was a distraction in life, it had no substance to give me meaning and purpose in life. You know, it's like buying a new car or a new computer. For the first day or two, you're showing everyone, it's all you can talk about, you're excited, but after a week, it's got its first scratch, it's old news, somebody else has something newer, then what? You're left empty again. You're left like, well, this is old, maybe I need to go for the next big goal. And so now I'd come full circle. I was suicidal again. I was empty again. I was wondering what the purpose of life was. And I was becoming depressed because I was drinking heavily. And this was in the early stages of my high school career. Well, it didn't take very long for me to hook up with a more intense crowd at school. And I got involved with that crowd in the world of the rave culture. And in the rave culture, it's fancy lights, and it's big parties, and it's masses of people, and there's a sense of unity and a sense of community. And in our third session in Beyond Addiction, we will actually go into the detail of what lies behind the rave culture. You'll want to make sure you stay tuned for that episode. Is it just a party? Is there a spirituality attached to it? How does the drug world fit in with that? Well, in my personal experience, I discovered that the rave scene was an interesting place. There was a lot of novelty, and there was a lot of distraction, and there was a lot of bright lights and cool music and all the rest of it. And we would stand on those dance floors, and we would dance for hours at a time, for whole nights. We would go out to the after parties, and we would be out from Friday night until some unearthly hour on Sunday morning, going from one party to the next. And it didn't take me very long being involved in this scene to also get involved in the world of illegal drugs. And I must mention to you that a lot of people think that the rave culture and the illegal drug scene are two separate things. They are not, and we'll show that to you in the third episode of this series, Beyond Addiction. But as I got involved in this whole scene and I started partying and I gave myself over to this way of life, now I knew why I was here. Alcohol in that world of heavy metal music, that was for the beginners. When you really got initiated into the world of pleasure, when you really got initiated into the world of enlightenment and of fulfillment, you would migrate away from the heavy metal music scene. And by the way, I really hated all techno music. That kind of driving rhythm type of music. It would drive me nuts. What was it that converted me away from the heavy metal music scene over to this rave culture, to this techno type music? Well, what was it? One night, a friend of mine and myself, we ended up at a rave party. It was a house music party in the city of Cape Town, South Africa. We didn't know what we were going for. We thought we were going to a heavy metal music concert. We had gotten all dressed up in our AC/DC shirts, and we were really going to, go and get on the mosh pit and get in there and have a lot of fun, getting our daylights beaten out of us and beating somebody else's daylights out of them, and just trying to have fun that way. And we ended up at this party without transport, and we could hear from the outside, this was our worst nightmare. We could hear that driving rhythm. We could hear the dance music, and we thought to ourselves, oh man, what are we going to do? We can't get out of here. We got nowhere to go. Oh well, the best thing you can do in a situation like that for a bunch of drug addicts is take your drugs and make the most of the situation. So that's what we did. We ended up sitting in the jungle music dance arena, and we had taken our combination of speed, amphetamine, and LSD. And there, after a little while, as we came up on our drug high, we all of a sudden began to make sense of the music. We had been there because we had to be there, and all of a sudden, as the LSD altered the brain chemistry, as the speed kicked in and we experienced that burst of energy, we began for the first time in our lives, began to hear the music almost like a language. Now imagine you go into a room and everybody's speaking German and you only speak English. You wouldn't make sense of it. But if all of a sudden something miraculous happened inside of your brain and you could begin to understand German, you could enter into the conversation. You could, enjoy the humor of the moment. You could share your story and listen to other people's stories, and it would make that whole conversation and that whole social gathering very enjoyable. And all of a sudden, something clicked inside of our brains as the neurochemistry was changed thanks to the use of these drugs. And what happened? The music that had formerly been a foreign language to us all of a sudden made perfect sense. We knew how to move to the music. We knew what the music was telling us to do. We could enter into the atmosphere and the feeling of the music. Do not think for a moment that music is a neutral thing. It is far from neutral. It is not only the lyrics that give us the meaning of the songs, it is also the music itself. That's why rock musicians can go from America, where they sing in English, and they continue to sing even in China in English, but they attract just as big crowds, and the crowds act in the same way, and they all claim to enjoy it. They don't understand a word the singer is singing, but they are moved by the music itself. We all know this because when you go on a romantic date with your girlfriend or with your boyfriend, guess what? You don't play heavy metal music. What do you play? You play some gentle guitar music, maybe some piano music in the background, some classical music, maybe some love ballads. Why? Because unless you're planning for a breakup, you're not going to use heavy metal music. If you want to have an enjoyable night, it's going to be gentle background music because it creates atmosphere. Music has the ability to transcend culture, to transcend language barriers, and it enables us to cross that divide. It creates the same feelings in all of us. It creates atmosphere, so you don't need music, lyrics at least. And that's why I don't understand in the Christian world, just as a footnote to this, why in the Christian world we're taking making such a thing as heavy metal Christian music or Christian rock or Christian rap or Christian R&B. Makes no sense to me. How can you take that packaging, which creates a certain atmosphere and a certain emotional experience, and then attach some good Christian words to it and think that that somehow sanctifies it, that somehow baptizes it, so that now that music is acceptable? No. We're still creating the same atmospheres. Can we use those atmospheres in the worship of God? Of course we can't. So how is it that we Christianize that type of music, which is about anger, or it's about rebellion, or it's about sexual rhythms, or it's about whatever it is? How can we just put Christian words to it? But anyway, going on from there. So we end up at this party, and we're on the dance floor. We've taken the drugs. The drugs have changed our neurochemistry. We're all of a sudden making sense of the music, and we're able to react to it appropriately. And from that night going forward, we abandoned completely the heavy metal music. We had found something more powerful. We had found something that gave us a greater sense of pleasure. Well, it didn't take long for me to get involved very deeply with the drug world, including drug dealing, because when you're using drugs on a large scale and you're getting for all your friends, you eventually get involved with the world of drug dealing. But you know what? Eventually, after a few years of this, and there was more to explore in this world. There were many different types of drugs. There were different types of music scenes, house music and Goa trance, and there was the jungle music genre and all the rest of it. And so, yes, there was more for us to explore. There were more places to go and people to meet. And so it took longer. But guess what? Same thing happened in this drug world as what happened when it came to the alcohol world. I came full circle. I realized it didn't satisfy. That what I was experiencing on that dance floor with all those people, it was synthetic, it was artificial. After the party and after the chemicals were all worn out of the system, those people were not your friends. Those people didn't know you. As long as everybody is high and everyone's at the party, it was synthetic, it was empty. You get to a point where you realize not all the money in the world, not all the power in the world, thanks to that aspect of the drug dealing, can satisfy. Not all the partying and not all the pleasure in the world can satisfy. And I came full circle and I realized I was empty, I was still broken, I was still the same old Adrian. I was still angry inside, I was still resentful. I still had no reason to get up in the morning. Where to from here? What now? And now I was suicidal again. Why not just end it all? Why not just cut the process short? Why not just get out of it? Except now I'm a heavy drug user. I've reached a point where I have a state of psychosis, of paranoia. I think everybody's out to get me. I think my best friend is an undercover cop. I think my girlfriend has been planted by the police and is feeding them information. I've got no one I can trust. I've got no one left in my life except little old me, and I'm not happy with me. Where to from here? Driving home from my girlfriend's house one day, I cry out to God in my desperation. I say, Lord, if you're there, you've got to do something or I'm going to end it. I cannot go on like this. And at that moment, absolutely nothing happened. Nothing but nothing happened. I didn't see angels. I didn't hear voices. I didn't see sign writing on the clouds. Nothing happened. And I thought, well, I guess that's it. That's it. There's nothing else to do. A few weeks later, I end up on a mountain somewhere with some friends. We go up there to take a whole lot of drugs just to get really out of it, away from the people, away from society, away from everything else. And that day, the Lord chooses to intervene through the presence of the Holy Spirit to give us another chance. We ended up in a very difficult situation. We had an extremely bad trip on an extremely high dosage of LSD. We reached a point where we couldn't walk anymore, where we could hardly talk. I reached a point where I was in and out of confusion. I reached a point where I thought I was going to die. And guess what? I wasn't even scared of it. I was looking forward to it. I wanted to die. I wanted out. And as we interacted with one another on that mountainside that day, sometimes fighting, sometimes talking, sometimes confused, sometimes not always knowing where we are, who we are, or completely disoriented, still, it's amazing how the Spirit of God has a way to gain access to your mind. And so as we were talking, a friend of mine was with me that day who had gone through this experience before. He had made a commitment to the Lord. He was back here now because of my influence, because of my drawing him. He realized we were in big trouble, and he started praying to the Lord. I didn't know this at the time, of course, because I wanted nothing to do with God. I wouldn't have been very happy if he was inviting God into this situation. Him and my girlfriend at the time, they started talking about what was wrong with their lives. They started talking about God. I'm getting frustrated because I'm thinking, how much worse can this get? I'm dying, and now someone's talking about God. I decided to spite them by not talking to them, which was the best decisions I ever made. And this guy who I had grown up with, went to the same church with, went to the same schools with, when he used the term God, I knew he was using the same, referring to the same being that I was referring to. But one difference. The way he described God was completely different to my picture of God. My picture of God, out there just like all authority figures, to spoil my fun, to stop me from having fun, to prevent me from enjoying life. He's describing God as merciful. He's describing God as love. He's describing God as, wait a second, as one who only gives us prohibitions so that we don't end up on a mountainside somewhere one day as young people with our lives ahead of us, thinking we're dying, wishing we were dead. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? Everything I've tried in life has brought me no success. Everything I've tried in life my way, which I thought promised me everything I was looking for, has not brought me the reward I hoped, has not brought me contentment and fulfillment. Now, he's making sense to me all of a sudden because I'm realizing this whole thing was a sham. This whole thing was the advertising campaign of the devil. But the substance of what you get in return from buying into that world is not what actually is promised on the outset. And I'm listening to this guy talk about God, and I'm realizing the only reason God has ever said, Adrian, don't do this, or Adrian, do that, is because he was trying to hedge me in. He was trying to protect me. He was trying to look out for my best interests. He could see, looking down with his foresight, with his vision, with his intelligence, with his wisdom, that the things that I think are going to give me satisfaction, the path that I think is going to lead to life, is going to lead to dissatisfaction and to death itself. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is a way of death. And I'm realizing if this is true, what my friend is saying, then God is not the big monster that I thought he was. God is not simply out there to destroy my fun. He is trying to protect me. He's trying to love me. He's trying to hold me in his arms. He's trying to prevent me from getting to this point where I am ready to die. That day, to cut a long story short, my friends and I decided if this was what God was like, it would be worthwhile exploring this. After all, everything else we had tried had not delivered. Maybe the one thing that we thought could never deliver would deliver. Maybe God could give us what our hearts were longing for all along. In our next segment, we will continue this story, and I will share with you from this point how the Lord helped us to get out of the world of drug addiction, to turn our lives over to Him. What were the key practices, practical steps that may even benefit you or somebody you know who's stuck in the drug world? What are the key steps that we took in our lives to get out of this world of drug addiction? So do tune in for the second part of Beyond Addiction. Let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, will you bless the viewer? Will you bless them with wisdom and with understanding? Will you help them to realize that you are the only one that can bring lasting joy and contentment and fulfillment to life? For we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.